That Gospel passage which I read just now begins with the word then. I think Matthew put the then at the beginning quite deliberately to show that this request by the mother of James and John, I'm going to call her Mrs. Zebedee because I don't know her name, and Zebedee was the boy's father, well, that request happened just after something else. What was the something else that came before? It was a very serious conversation between Jesus and the 12 disciples. Jesus had taken the 12 disciples aside. That meant he could talk privately to them as a group. And he warned them clearly and very explicitly about what would happen to Jesus when they got to Jerusalem. They knew he was going to die and rise again, and that it wasn't going to be a nice death. And then after that really serious conversation, along comes Mrs. Zebedee with her 2 boys, John and James, and by the way, that's the James whose saint's day is today, the 25th of July. And she comes up and makes this request, which now seems quite outrageous. Put my 2 boys in the places of honour at your right and left hand. It's an extreme request, as we would see it, and not exactly made at the ideal moment. Well, Mrs. Zebedee just doesn't really understand the situation with Jesus. Maybe the boys didn't either. Well, I call them boys, they're grown men, but they're still the mother's boys. What happens is that Jesus has to have with them it doesn't work like that kind of conversation. Now, what was Mrs. Zebedee looking for? I mean, sitting in specific places. Well, that's putting them in positions of honour so that the other people looking at James and John would recognise that they'd been given an honoured position were important. In turn, James and John would think of themselves as important people. It's all about human relationships. And apart from giving them the position in the first place, it doesn't really involve Jesus or his father at all. Where does this come from? What gave Mrs. Zebedee the idea of asking for something like this? Well, I imagine it's consistent with the society she'd grown up in. Galilee, fishing and farming area, sort of working class. But they knew that there were high-ups, the toffs if you like, people who were regarded as important in Jerusalem. They were aware of an importance they didn't have. Mrs. Zebedee was ambitious for her boys. Most mothers are. But she was trying to fit Jesus into her purely human understanding of the world around her. Not the only one who did that. Wasn't it after the resurrection that the disciples said to Jesus, "Now are you going to restore the kingdom?" Even at that point, they hadn't let go of the idea that the Messiah was going to throw the Romans out. Well, for all that I'm critical of Mrs. Zebedee, I can also see myself doing something, well, not the outrageous request so much as the seeing things through my own human eyes. Well, it's easy to do, isn't it? The world we see is hard fact. We can see it, touch it, feel it. We can't see God. And so, whether you live in 1st century Israel or now in 21st century Britain, it's a bit too easy to slide into thinking that the world as we see it is reality and forget that God is bigger and not confined to this world and can do much more than we think is possible. So we try to fit him into our world instead of asking him to come and intervene in what is actually his world. Now, jumping back to what Mrs. Z was asking for, status. What did Jesus think of wanting status? Well, not very much, I think. He points out that what Christians should be doing, his followers should be doing, is the exact opposite of the Gentile rulers who are important, or at least think they're important because they hold political power. Jesus says, don't go acting like them who delight in having power and status. Whoever wants to be first in the kingdom, whoever wants a position, must be a servant. What's it mean? I think there's two things here. One is Jesus saying that recognition and status have to be earned. Not given, earned. And secondly, he's saying to people, his disciples, don't look for status or recognition at all. Just get on with what you're supposed to be doing. Well, that's another thing that maybe is a bit negative, but while Jesus doesn't seem interested in status as human status, recognition by other humans, there are places where God does something about it and is a leveler. He actually wants to give status or benefits to people who've been put down by society. We see that in the Magnificat, Mary's prophetic words when she went to visit Elizabeth. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He's brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. If you want to look it up, that's Luke chapter 1, verses 51 and 52. But although God seems entirely unimpressed by whether someone has status within human society, he's very concerned with something which is actually much more important. Its relationship with him. And that gives me an excuse to quote my favourite verse from John chapter 1. It's verse 12. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. That word children says volumes. We aren't just servants, we're made family. That's a closeness that is far more important than status in human society. One thing that brings it out, I don't know if it's still there, but there was at one time a sign on the wall in the chapel. If it matters to you, it matters to God. Well, that's the father and children relationship. If something matters to one of us, it matters to our Heavenly Father. That's far greater and better than issues of human status. So what am I saying? Beware, please, of thinking that what we can see is real, and having defined what's real, being cautious about letting God in. It's his world. Don't imagine that he can't do it merely because it looks difficult or you can't see the way forward. Don't see things in purely human terms when you're thinking about what God can do. And rejoice in this family relationship with our Heavenly Father.